pages. I'd like, if I may, to acknowledge receiving your esteemed award simply by reading a few pages from my 2010 book, Nemesis. Coming where they do, they're the pages I like best in Nemesis. They constitute the last pages of the last work of fiction I've published, the end of the line after 31 books. The narrator of Nemesis is Arie Mesnikov, a Newark architect, formerly one of Mr. Cantor's playground boys, who in the epidemic summer of 1944, at the age of 12, contracted polio and was crippled by the disease for the rest of his life. So too was Bucky Cantor, the 23-year-old playground director at Newark's Chancellor Avenue School, badly crippled, even more badly crippled for the rest of his life. Arie, after a time, recovers from the psychological, if not the physical, effects of the disease, attends college and graduate school, opens an architecture office, marries, has children, and counts his life a success. Embittered and guilt-ridden, Bucky Cantor, who long ago rejected the possibility of a wife and a family for a man in his fix, counts his life a humiliating failure. One summer day in 1971, 27 years after both were permanently crippled by polio, Arie runs into his old playground director in downtown Newark. They begin to meet for lunch every week, and over time, Arie hears from Bucky the story of all that happened to him during that epidemic summer, and of the isolation and shame that Bucky has suffered since. This story, as Arie recounts it, constitutes the novel. Nemesis ends with Arie remembering the athlete Bucky had been before the cataclysm that destroyed his young body. From Nemesis. And yet, at 23, he was, to all of us boys, the most exemplary and revered authority we knew. A young man of convictions, easygoing, kind, fair-minded, thoughtful, stable, gentle, soft-spoken, vigorous, muscular, a comrade and leader both. And never a more glorious figure than on the afternoon near the end of June, before the '44 epidemic seriously took hold in the city, before, for more than a few of us, our bodies and our lives would be drastically transformed, when we all marched behind him to the big dirt field across the street and down a short slope from the playground. It was where the high school football team held its workouts and practices, and where he was going to show us how to throw the javelin. He was dressed in his skimpy, satiny track shorts and his sleeveless top. He wore cleated shoes, and leading the pack, he carried the javelin loosely in his right hand. When we got down to the field, it was empty, and Mr. Cantor had us gather together on the sidelines at the Chancellor Avenue end, where he let us each examine the javelin and heft it in our hands. A slender metal pole weighing a little under 2 pounds and measuring about 8.5 feet long. He showed us the various holds you could use on the whipcord grip, and then the one that he preferred. Then he explained to us something about the background of the javelin, which began in early societies before the invention of the bow and arrow with the throwing of the spear for hunting, and continued in Greece at the first Olympics in the 8th century BC. The first javelin thrower was said to be Hercules, the great warrior and slayer of monsters, who, Mr. Cantor told us, was the giant son of the supreme Greek god Zeus and the strongest man on earth. The lecture over, he said he would now do his warm-ups, and we watched while he limbered up for about 20 minutes, some of the boys on the sidelines doing their best to mimic his movements. It was important, he said, at the same time as he was performing a side split with his pelvis to the ground, always to work beforehand at stretching the groin muscles, which were easily susceptible to strain. He used the javelin as a stretching stick for many of the exercises, twisting and turning with it balanced like a yoke across his shoulders while he kneeled and squatted and lunged, and then while he stood and flexed and rotated his torso. He did a handstand and began walking a wide circle on his hands, and some of the kids tried that. With his mouth only inches from the ground, he informed us that he was doing the handstands in lieu of exercising on a bar to stretch his upper body. He finished off with forward body bends and trunk back bends, during which he kept his heels fixed to the ground while pushing upward with his hips and arching his back amazingly high. When he said he was going to sprint twice around the edge of the field, we followed, barely able to keep up with him, but pretending that it was we who were warming up for the throw. Then for a few minutes, he practiced running along an imaginary runway without throwing the javelin, just carrying it high, flat, and straight. When he was ready to begin, he told us what to watch for, starting with his approach run and the bounding stride, and ending with the throw. Without the javelin in his hand, he walked through the entire delivery for us in slow motion, describing it as he did so. It's not magic, boys, and it's no picnic either. However, if you practice hard, he said, and you work hard, and you exercise diligently, if you're regular with your balance drills 1, your mobility drills 2, and your flexibility drills 3, if you're faithful to your weight training program, and if throwing the javelin really matters to you, I guarantee you something will come of it. Everything in sports requires determination. The 3 Ds, determination, dedication, and discipline, and you're practically all the way there. As usual, taking every precaution, he told us that for safety's sake, no one was to dart out onto the field at any time. We were to watch everything from where we were standing. He made this point twice. He couldn't have been more serious, the seriousness being the expression of his commitment to the task. And then he hurled the javelin. You could see each of his muscles bulging when he released it into the air. He let out a strangulated yowl of effort, one we all went around imitating for days afterward, a noise expressing the essence of him, the naked battle cry of striving excellence. The instant the javelin took flight from his hand, he began dancing about to recover his balance and not fall across the foul line he etched in the dirt with his cleats. And all the while, he watched the javelin as it made its trajectory in a high, sweeping arc over the field. None of us had ever before seen an athletic act so beautifully executed right in front of our eyes. The javelin carried way beyond the 50-yard line down to the far side of the opponent's 30, and when it descended and landed, the shaft quivered and its pointed metal tip angled sharply into the ground from the sailing force of the flight. We sent up a loud cheer and began leaping about. All of the javelin's trajectory had originated in Mr. Cantor's supple muscles. His was the body, the feet, the legs, the buttocks, the trunk, the arms, the shoulders, even the thick stump of the bull neck that, acting in unison, had powered the throw. It was as though our playground director had turned into a primordial man, hunting for food on the plains where he foraged, taming the wilds by the might of his hand. Never were we more in awe of anyone. Through him, we boys had left the little story of the neighborhood and entered the historical saga of our ancient gender. He threw the javelin repeatedly that afternoon, each throw smooth and powerful, each throw accompanied by that resounding mingling of a shout and a grunt, and each, to our delight, landing several yards farther down the field than the last. Running with the javelin aloft, stretching his throwing arm back behind his body, bringing the throwing arm through to release the javelin high over his shoulder, and releasing it then like an explosion, he seemed to us invincible.